Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Binge Watch Britney. So for today's episode, we are going to be covering the new Netflix documentary Beckham. So I'm not sure if it's going to be a season 2, but the season that we're going to be covering is season 1. And so I really was not expecting to watch this. I think I saw a few promotions for it, but I wasn't initially interested in it at first. But then I kept seeing it and I was like, okay, let me give it a chance, let me check it out. And so I know right now there's a lot of sports documentaries that are really popular. There was The Last Dance with the Bulls and Michael Jordan. I did not watch it, but I heard a lot about it, and so I'm not sure if I'm going to check that out, but definitely an interesting documentary. I learned a lot of stuff about it from reading just different recaps of it, hearing other people talk about it, and I know that they were talking about like the friction between Michael Jordan and Pippen, and then there was one big story where it was talking about how Pippen signed his contract. He basically wasn't getting paid anything compared to Michael Jordan, and then also compared to his other teammates. And so I remember seeing that Larsa Pippen had to tweet something, and she said something like, Pippen's doing okay, we're doing okay, basically, like that they're not struggling for money. And so obviously there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of these documentaries as far as learning the stuff that goes on behind the scenes with all of these different teams and athletes. And so the other documentary that came out recently was Quarterback. I did not get a chance to watch it. My mom was watching it, and I saw that Patrick Mahomes is on it with his wife, and so I may check that out. I'm not sure yet. But again, just a few different documentaries going around. Super interesting to hear about them. And so for today's episode, we are going to be talking about Beckham. If it isn't clear already, I'm actually super, super excited to be doing this documentary. I was a huge Spice Girls fan growing up in Canada. They were huge, they were everywhere. And I actually went to a Spice Girl concert. I think it might have been in like 96 or 97, I'm not sure. But to be completely honest, I don't know all of their songs. I know that Wannabe is really popular, and there's one other song, maybe Stay You'll Be There, were the only two songs that I really knew. So I don't think I've heard their full album, but I did watch the movie Spice World. It was awesome. It was just a great movie to see as a kid and just see them singing, seeing all of their antics, and then that crazy kind of like spy thing that they had going on. And so it was just really cool to see that movie. And then also, again, Spice Girls were everywhere. And so I know that there's been a lot of talk with Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, and how there's like this joke of people who aren't American football fans are saying basically that Taylor Swift put Travis Kelce on the map, and there's a lot of different arguments about that. People are saying, hey, she didn't put him on the map. We knew who he was way before she came along. And then there's other people who are saying, yeah, she definitely put him on the map. And so this made me think of Posh and Bex for obvious reasons, because I think you can say that there's a similar argument about Posh and Bex, and whether or not Victoria Beckham put David Beckham on the map. And I think it's pretty clear that she did. Obviously, if you're a football fan, you're going to be more likely to know who some of these people are. If you were a football fan in the UK, you were more likely to know who David Beckham was. But if you were somebody else who lived in another country and you didn't watch soccer or football, you might not have known who he was, but you would have known who Posh Spice was. And so I definitely think that she did put him on the map, which is not a bad thing at all. They were both very successful people in their own right, and they came together and they just created this power storm, this power couple. Like, they were everywhere. They were very fashion forward, very influential. And so I didn't keep up with them a lot over the years, but back then they were always on tabloids, and so you kind of always knew kind of like the major headlines of what was going on with them. So I knew that they were together, that they had gotten married, and then I think I knew that kind of it was a big deal when he cut his hair. I don't even know if I knew that it was a big deal that he cut his hair, but I knew that I just remember seeing him be involved and how that was a big thing. And so anyway, one of the really cool things about Beckham is that in seeing this documentary, there's obviously a lot of clips, old clips, from back in the day when they first got together, and just looking at different images of him on Google, different pictures and stuff like that, you really, or at least I really felt like he was the Allen Iverson of football. He was fashion forward. He had this like bad boy image as far as wanting to branch out and do different things on his own, and he kind of talked about that in the documentary. And so I definitely think that he was not necessarily ahead of his time, but he was definitely in the right place in his life and his career to take advantage of all of the media attention that came his way. And so now we are going to get into the show. So the first thing I want to talk about is all of the throwback clips. And so I was really, really, really surprised by how many old videos and old footage that they had. And I wasn't really expecting that. So I was like, do they really just like tape everything? Do they really have that much media attention on them back in the day? And so I didn't realize that Victoria Beckham had basically like 5 different documentaries. So she had one for Coming to America, one for Victoria's Secret, and then I think 2 others that I can't think of. And so that makes sense why there's a lot of old footage of them out there. And then obviously when they were on tour and then maybe part of the Spice World movie that they were filming, they just had a lot of cameras around them. And so pretty much it seems like everything was caught on camera. And I think it's really cool that they're able to look back on all of that footage and just remember how it was back in the day when they first got together, when they were just developing their relationship and how they always wanted to be around each other. They talked a lot about how David or Bex, how he would travel long distances to see her for like 5 minutes and then turn around and go back. And so it was just really sweet to see the beginning of their relationship and how like committed he was to her. I do want to say that with some of the clips that they show throughout the show, not necessarily the throwback clip, but some of the portions where they're showing him being interviewed, they have at one point they have this shot several times, but basically they're showing Beckham and the different people that they're interviewing throughout the documentary. They have this close up of them, and it's of them watching old footage or whatever. And I'm not really a fan of that close up because it's super, super close. They could have definitely zoomed out a little bit. But it was cool to see, like, you could see their eyes moving and reacting to whatever was on screen that they were watching. And so it was just really cool to see them actively watching what was going on, and then just how their body language changed when they saw like a great play, or just like them seeing them remember those feelings and being in that moment, because they all were part of something really huge, something really historic. Even if you weren't as good as David Beckham, if you were his teammate, you were kind of pulled into all of the craziness that was going on. And so you were definitely a part of it, whether you played a lot, whether you didn't play a lot, or whether or not you agreed with their relationship or whatever. You were a part of their storyline. And not even their storyline because it's not like scripted, but just a part of their story in general. And so moving on to the next point. So I want to talk about the background for Beck. So I had no idea that he had been basically signed to play professional football since he was 15. He was signed by a guy named Sir Alex Ferguson. At first I thought it was weird that he was called Sir Alex Ferguson, but I didn't realize that he's actually knighted, so that's kind of cool. I don't really know what goes into being knighted, but I know that people can be knighted, and so that's kind of like a huge thing. And then I also found out throughout, or then I also found from, then I also found out from the documentary that he was kind of, Bex was kind of one of the first people to get endorsements, and so that's really cool because, from when I was growing up, you obviously had, I grew up in the, 90s, mid 90s, late 90s, and so on. And so obviously you saw like basketball players getting endorsements, but for him as a soccer player, he was like one of the first people to get endorsements. And so that was a huge thing of just having like different streams of income. And so one of the things they talk about in the documentary is that Beckham, when he would get his check, he would spend it right away, and then he would spend a week waiting until he got his next check, and he spent it on a new car. He bought jewelry. jewelry, he bought nice outfits and things like that, and so he was really living his best life with all the money that he was getting. And then one of the things they talked about is that when you're an athlete, when you're a professional athlete, you need an agent. This agent is the person who kind of handles all of your contracts, all of your deals, and so they are meeting with the other party to kind of work out the best deal to get you paid and to get you the best conditions in terms of the deal of whatever contract you're going to have. And so there was some conflict between him and Sir Alex Ferguson, where he wanted Bex to sign with an agent that he knew, but Bex went with somebody different. So they didn't really talk about how that played out as far as did Bex make the wrong decision or whatever, but they just talked about how that was kind of like a huge kind of conflict for them. I think that this makes sense because, as I said, he was signed when he was 15. He was discovered, quote unquote, by Sir Alex Ferguson, and he was really shaping him as a soccer player, as a football player, and helping him to kind of like grow into his career. And so I think that he expected to kind of be the voice that Bex listened to, and like he went with all of his ideas, listened to his suggestions and all of that. And so him going with a different agent was him kind of like breaking away from that and kind of wanting to do his own thing. And you see throughout the documentary, through all of the 4 episodes, that he is really kind of like trying to do his own thing, find his own identity, and kind of really just establish himself as an individual. So the next thing I want to talk about is Bex and Posh, or more accurately, Posh and Bex. So it's so interesting that it's Posh and Bex first. Usually I feel like it should be the man's name first and then the woman's second, but obviously Posh and Bex is more kind of like trendy. It sounds better. And so I really like how he talked about how they got together. He saw her on TV and he was like, who's that? I'm gonna marry her. And then you kind of see it play out with how they meet each other for the first time. They trade numbers, and then they're just kind of basically spending all of their time together, all of their free time together. And so I really like it when a man claims a woman as his wife. He says, hey, I'm going to marry her. That's going to be the love of my life. That's who I'm going to be with. He's like really sure and confident in the fact that this is his person. This is the one that he's going to be with forever. And so I really like when you see that happening, because I feel like that's not something that I've had happen in my own life, but I feel like that's so aspirational to see that type of love on camera, especially in the world of sports, because, you know, you have these different women trying to get with athletes for different reasons, and not that it's very rare, but it's very rare that you see a couple that's been together since before both people got really big, got really famous. And so I think it's really just cool to see like the beginning of their love story and the beginning of their careers as well. The other thing I want to talk about in terms of Posh and Bex is just how they were fashion icons. Obviously we know that the 90s style is very different from what's happening now. You have baggy clothes, you have the do-rags, you have the color block fashion, you have the loud colors, and so Posh and Bex, they were really fashion forward. They sometimes coordinated outfits, and then sometimes they just wore things that complemented what the other person was wearing. I did see a picture when I was Googling images of him from like the 90s and stuff like that. I saw this clip of or this picture of him meeting Prince Charles, and he's in like a black do-rag, and then he has like a sleeveless shirt, and then I think he has on like khaki pants or something like that. So he's dressed very casually to meet Prince Charles, and I thought it was cool that he had a do-rag on. That just speaks to how, not necessarily powerful, but how influential he is as a person himself, that he can just literally wear whatever to meet someone as big as Prince Charles. And also I think it just speaks to kind of who he is as a person and his individuality and how he wants to express himself, because as I was saying, I do think that he is the Allen Iverson of football. He's really studying like the trends for athletes when it comes to football. And then moving into my next topic, so we have Bex and the World Cup situation, so the World Cup of '98. And so at this point of the documentary, they talk about how Bex would fly and drive to see Victoria just for like 5 minutes, an hour, or something like that. And oftentimes he would drive for like 2 hours or something like that. Or, I'm sorry, 2 hours, 4 hours to see her and spend 5 minutes with her and then leave. And so obviously this takes a toll on you as an athlete, because this is time that you could be resting. This is time that you could be studying your plays. This is time that you could be talking or bonding with your other teammates, talking with your coach and stuff like that. Or even time for you to be resting. And so it was a big deal that he was spending all of his time just to get to Victoria. And so they talked about how Sir Alex Ferguson thought that this was distracting, especially the fact that he was dating someone who was so popular and well known at the time, that it would just cause him to not be focused on football. We also heard like his teammates talk about how he would be on the phone with Victoria for hours, and they would be like, "Hey, you need to turn off your phone. You need to stop talking to her," and stuff like that. And so it was just really cool to see how committed he was to building their relationship and stuff like that. But then it was also cool to see that he was able to like just snap into game mode and just really be prepared to play and play well in his upcoming games. And so he had a coach at one point called Hotto. Hotto was a former football player, and he's kind of a big deal. It was someone that I think his dad was aware of or watched as a player, and obviously Beckham watched him as well. And so it was a big deal that Bex got to be part of his team. And so he, as a result of all of this commitment that Bex had to Victoria, he ended up benching Bex, and then we have this situation of him having this red flag moment. And so in the documentary, they talk about how Posh told him literally the night before this game that she was pregnant. And so obviously the implications of that conversation that Victoria was having with the interviewer is that maybe she distracted him, and maybe she told him at the wrong time. And so obviously she's talking about that, and she's talking about it in the sense of saying like, you know, this is what we wanted. We were so happy about this. And I don't think she never said that I don't think she directly said that she thought it would be distracting for him. I think that she kind of like expected him to be happy, you know what I mean? And so at the time that this is happening, they're super young. I think they're maybe in their early 20s. I can't recall. But for him to be so early in his career, to be in this new relationship and then have a baby on the way, this is a lot for an athlete to be dealing with. Now, for the red flag moment, we have this scene where we see a footage of the actual game. We see Bex get hit from behind. He falls to the ground hard, and the person who slammed into him is standing over him, and then he's kind of like backing away. And then you see Beckham like kick his leg at the guy and causes the guy to fall. And so you see Beckham approach the official. I think the announcers are talking about how this is going to be a yellow flag, but it's a red flag, and so he's ejected from the game. At this point, I can't even remember what the score was, but this was like a huge moment in the game. And so Bex being kind of like the star player, him being kicked out of the game was a huge step back for them. And what a lot of people talked about was that this was the turning point for the game. This is what caused them to lose the game. They bashed him as being reckless, as being stupid. He was booed. He was bullied really badly by everyone in the country for what he did in that moment and how it cost them the game. And so one of the things that they don't really talk about is how the team had the chance to win the game on penalty kicks, but both kicks that they had, I think, got blocked. And so that it wasn't completely his fault that they lost. They had a chance to win it, and then the other players just didn't make it happen. And so you see this moment where kind of once the game is ending, you have the sideline reporters, they go up to Hotto and they're like asking him about the game, about Bex, and he just throws Bex under the bus. He doesn't even really try to support his player. And you wouldn't really see that in today's world of sports. The coach would definitely try to take up for the player, try to protect the player. And even in American football with the Colorado team, Coach Prime, you had Travis Hunter getting a nasty hit from a player, I think Blackburn, on another team. I think it was Colorado State. And you had the coach kind of in his interview or conference before the game. He's, trashing Coach Prime, and then after the game, after the hit happened, he doesn't really, kind of like defend his play, like say that it was I don't think he really talked about like the negative impact of that type of hit. Like he didn't really acknowledge that social media was going crazy from that hit. And so this is a very similar situation. So that Blackburn kid was getting a lot of threats on the internet. His address was leaked and he was just getting all kinds of crazy threats. And so it's really important in that moment when someone makes a huge play in a game that changes the outcome of the game or something like that. Coaches should really try to defend their players. And so Huddle didn't defend Bex, and he really threw him under the bus. And so Bex was basically harassed and bullied and taunted and booed and spit on and stuff like that for months after that game ended, because in other countries, soccer or football is a really big deal. And when they have these types of games against other countries that they're rivals with, that they've had wars with, winning that game is a huge deal. And so when you lose something like that, especially in certain tournaments or certain games like the World Cup, for example, when you lose a game like that to a country that you're really supposed to beat, it just really heightens everything. And then you just have basically every citizen in the country mad at you because you cost them the game, or they think that you cost them the game. And so one of the things that they talked about in the documentary is that after they lost that match, Bex flew to America because the Spice Girls were on tour. And so I guess not that you didn't really hear much about the game in America, but it wasn't like he was going to get booed by all of America for losing that game, you know what I mean? So he kind of had his escape route. He got to get away from the noise a little bit, spend time with the Spice Girls. He was in the documentary, they talked about like how he was protected because they couldn't really get close to him. And so when he returned to the UK, obviously the fans were still going crazy. They were still upset with him. And he was just really thrown back into that world of being public enemy number one. And so when he returned to the UK, he was reunited with his Man United or Manchester United team. And when he was on the World Cup team, that is like kind of like the best players from England. So that's not his primary team. So Man United is his primary team. That's the team that Sir Alex Ferguson coaches. And so those are the people like he kind of like not necessarily grew up with, but he started his career with that team and with those players, and so they know each other really well. And so they really did their best to protect him and just kind of like keep him away from the noise, and then also keep other people away from him. So the next point I want to talk about is the birth of Brooklyn. So Brooklyn is the Beckham's firstborn child. And one of the things they talked about with this is there was headlines in the newspapers when Victoria went to the hospital because she was scheduled to give birth. She was going to have a C-section. And so the headlines when people found out was too posh to push. And so if you're not familiar with the Spice Girls, Posh Spice is called that because she is all about I don't want to say she's all about material things, but she had like the best of everything. She's in the best labels. She's very well dressed. She had expensive watches, expensive shoes, expensive bags. She's wearing Tom Ford of all things, Gucci, and all of that. And so she's really not, I don't want to say snobby or snooty, but she is, you can tell that she has money. And so they were poking at her and saying that she was too good to push, too good to deliver her baby without a C-section, when that was really not the case. And so, and obviously, I think C-section is more hard to recover from than actually giving birth the other way. And so, anyway, so they had the baby was born. Beckham ended up announcing outside the hospital, so you just see him step outside of the hospital, and he's just smiling. He's really happy. He's telling the reporters there the name of the baby, the sex of the baby, that Victoria is all right. And then he talks about how that night that he basically slept in front of the door because he didn't want anyone to come in and take the baby. And so you find out that they have a lot of kidnapping threats. And I don't know if it's completely related to everything with the World Cup, or if it's just the fact that they're a famous couple and people are crazy and just want to really like threaten their safety and everything. And so he was really frightened that their baby was going to be taken away from him, or from them. And then they also kept the baby covered because they were followed by paparazzi everywhere, and so they really just wanted to protect their baby, keep his identity a secret, keep him like out of the papers and stuff like that. And so that's just really crazy to deal with that, because I don't know if they had bodyguards all of the time, but it seemed like from the footage that we were seeing, there were times where you could just walk up to them and interact with them and stuff like that, which is fine. But it's just really crazy to be a celebrity and to have people who want to threaten your safety and just not feeling like you can live a normal life. And so the next thing I want to talk about is the European Cup. I can't really remember this match exactly, but they brought up something called a treble, which is basically when they win like a certain type of three tournaments or matches in a row. And so the big deal with this was that for the European Cup, I think the last time they won was in 1968. So it had been a really, really long time since this particular team, and maybe England, I'm not sure, I think it's this particular team, Man United, had won the European Cup. And so they talked about the game, they showed old footage of it, they started the game really badly, and eventually they were able to turn it around and they won. And so that's just a really positive moment to see, because you literally see them like studying history. As I said, it's been since 1968 that they had won anything. I think this is in the mid 90s or late 90s that they are winning the cup again. And so obviously there's a lot of pressure on them, because in the documentary they talked about how was winning this cup, the European Cup, was just such a big feat that nobody else could do it again. And so it was good that Bex was a part of that. Next, we have the wedding. So one of the things that I didn't realize, because after I watched the documentary, I did some research, and so I didn't realize that Posh had a book, and she talks about how I think either before she gave birth or before the wedding, there was like a cheating rumor of Bex kissing somebody else, and so I guess she called her on the phone, told her about this, and the very first time she saw him, she just swung at him, she punched him, and then I guess they just talked about what happened, and then like 4 months later, they either got married or had their baby. I'm not sure which one it was, but I just thought that was so interesting, because you have this high profile couple, and then they're just dealing with all of these cheating rumors, and they just have a lot going on. And so with them being a very influential and powerful couple at this time, they're probably one of the most popular couples in the UK. They had a wedding. It was at an Irish castle. They had a lot of people there, and they had given one magazine, I'm not sure what it was called, one magazine or newspaper, something like that, access to the wedding. So only that particular I'm just going to say company, only that particular company was able to come in and take photos. And that's a really big deal, because before social media came along, you had these images of people coming out through tabloids or newspapers. And so paparazzi wanted to take the best photos that they could, because they could then sell those photos for a lot of money. And so the wedding was a huge deal. A lot of people were there. They wore a purple suit and a purple dress, and it was just really cool how they were just able to do their own thing. She wasn't wearing white. They weren't traditional by any means in what they were doing. So I think that was pretty awesome, and it really just speaks to how much power that they had, and that they were able to be married in a castle. They had a lot of people there, and then they had paparazzi or a media company there taking photos. And so I want to go into the next thing. So we have David getting traded. And so if you're not familiar with trades, basically an athlete can be traded to another team, and basically he's sold to another team. He has a certain time frame that he has to report to his new team. He has to go through a physical and evaluation to make sure that he's able to play. And then with these trades, especially if you have a family, there's not really a whole lot of room for your family to get adjusted into the new place that you guys are living in, because the priority is for the athlete to get there, to be able to show up for practice, show up for games, and all of that stuff. And so the athlete, if it's just him by himself, he can just get an apartment. He can have other people figure out the situation as far as the financial part of the apartment, or finding a house and stuff like that. With a girlfriend or wife who has kids, there's a lot more involved in that moving process. You're packing up your house, you're trying to find schools for your kids, you're trying to find the best neighborhood to live in, you're trying to find somewhere that has the best schools. And so for the families of the athlete, there is a lot that goes into this. And so for Bex himself, getting traded is kind of a huge deal for some people, especially if it's your first time being traded. If you spent a long time with one particular team and then all of a sudden you're getting traded, it's really disjointing to be sent to another team to play. You don't really lose those connections that you had with the first team, but you're in a place where now you have to build new relationships. You have to start over from scratch. You have to build relationships with these people that are now your team. And so for him, he was originally I think supposed to go to Barcelona. He really wanted to stay with Man United, but they really just wanted him gone. And so he said, you know what, if you want me gone, I'm going to go where I want to go. I want to go to, I think it's Real Madrid. They say it really fast, but it doesn't sound like it's real. I think it's Real Madrid. Anyway, if I mispronounce it, you know what I mean. And so he goes to that team. He's obviously in Spain, so they primarily speak Spanish or Portuguese. I'm not sure what it is. I can't recall, but he doesn't know the language. And so this is another level of adjustment for him, because now he can't directly communicate with his teammates. They have to rely on gestures. He has an interpreter, so you see him and I don't know if it's like his first day there, but his first week, they have a press conference. They're speaking the foreign language. They are introducing him to the team. He has to make a statement. They have an interpreter there kind of telling him what's going on. And so he is really just thrown into a new team, into a new life, and he's just having to navigate being in a new place without his family, because it takes a while for Victoria to get there with the kid. And so this is a huge thing that we'll get into later, so I'm just going to leave it there and transition into my next point. So at this point that Bex is playing for Real Madrid, it's going to take me a while to get that right. He at this point is kind of not necessarily at the height of his fame, but he at this point is really super famous. So one of his new teammates describes this experience as if they are a rock band. They have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of fans just hanging out outside waiting to just see Bex either getting on the bus, that type of thing. And so it's a really chaotic experience for his teammates, because they've never been involved in something like that. That Real Madrid team, they're really good and they have their own fan base, but Bex is like on another level. And so he's treated like a rock star. And then at one point, his teammates are talking about how they are playing, I think, 30 additional games. They're going to like 30 additional different places. And they're just talking about how that impacts them, because they're spending more time away from home, more time away from their fans, because those additional games are so that people in those different countries or those different places can see Bex, because that was, I guess, part of the trade or whatever. And so one of the things that I think the president talked about is how just signing Bex to their team, they tripled their revenue, because he brings in a lot of money with him wherever he goes. And so the players just talked about how they have to travel more, they're away from their families and all of that. One of the things that they talk about at this point in the documentary is that when Bex was with Man United, he had a new coach come in, Carlos, I can't remember his last name, but they didn't kind of really get along. Carlos, for whatever reason, didn't like Bex or whatever. And so when he left Man United, he left that coach behind. Carlos ended up coming to Real Madrid, and so he's having to deal with having a coach that knows him, but they kind of don't really get along. And so they just had that dynamic to navigate in Madrid. So the point that I wanted to get to was Pasha's kind of transition to Spain. And so her big thing was that she didn't want to just be a football wife. She obviously had her own performing career. She was a singer. She was part of a group. And so she really just didn't want to move to this new country and just kind of be waiting around on her husband to do things and then taking care of the kids. And so she really liked being in the UK. And so it seemed like she was going back and forth a lot. So she would spend time in the UK, come to Spain, and then obviously go back to the UK. And I think that she didn't move there for maybe the first year. So they do show in the documentary that she eventually, comes to Spain. She moves there permanently. They show the house that they're living in, all of this stuff. And so while all of this is happening, Victoria is getting horrible treatment in the press. They're talking about how she doesn't like Spain. They say that she doesn't like Spain because it smells like garlic. So the person who's talking at this point is saying that one thing that you don't want to do is criticize the food. That's going to turn everybody against you. And so she just gets reamed in the press. They hate her. They think that she hates being there. And so that's just a really tricky thing to navigate, because you have your athlete of a husband who is playing for this country, this really big team. He has his own fan base, and then just having to balance your wife being hated in the country where you have to work. And so that's just obviously a difficult thing to deal with. So with Bex being moved to this new team, you have something that I call the position wars. So you have this guy Figo, who is playing the same position that Bex plays. I don't know what position he plays exactly. I think it's right midfield or something like that. And this guy Figo plays the same position, so they're just trying to figure out who's going to play what position. And so Bex ends up playing a little bit further back, so he's playing more in defense, and this is kind of not really working for him. And so he really has to transition into his new role, and he struggles a little bit with that. And so I'm just going to leave it there and move on into my next point. We talked a little bit earlier about the cheating rumors, and so here in Madrid, we have the first major cheating rumor that they talk about in the documentary. And so I don't really remember hearing a lot about the cheating rumors. So they obviously talk about how it broke in the press that Bex was having an affair, he was cheating, all of this stuff. And so in the documentary, they don't really deny the cheating, but they just talk about how it's a really difficult time for them. As you can imagine, all of their business is in the paper 24/7, and then you have this really difficult situation of someone being accused of cheating and just really having to deal with that situation, work on your relationship, better your relationship, and figure out what it is that the both of you want. Do you guys want to stay together? Do you want to fight this situation that's happening? And so, as I said, they don't really directly deny that cheating happened. I'm not really sure. I don't really want to get into that a whole lot, but that was the first real test that they had in their relationship, and it put them under a lot of stress. And so they obviously talk about that in the documentary, and so I think it was good that they talked about it, because that was a huge moment in his career and in their relationship, so it is worth addressing. So the next thing I want to talk about is the Real Madrid team. So eventually they get a new coach. It's this guy named Fabio. He's an Italian. He's taken over the team. He's really strict in how he wants to do things, and so for whatever reason, I can't remember what it is, he ends up benching Bex, and so this is not a good thing. People know that you don't like bench David Beckham, and so what this leads to is a American guy. I don't really know what his position was at the time that this is happening, but he was trying to start a soccer team, a football team in America, and so he said, hey, what if we can get David Beckham? And so because David is frustrated with not playing, he ends up taking this meeting with this guy from the LA Galaxy. He says that he wants to stay with Real Madrid. He has no interest in leaving. He just takes the meeting just to hear what the guy has to say, and he wants to stay with his team. Somehow Fabio finds out about this meeting, and he's like, that's it, you're never going to play for me ever again. You're basically not even just bench, you're like not even a part of his team. And so he wouldn't allow Bex to train with the team. He had to train off to the side. There was this one guy who was with him, and that's just really sad to see, because as you know, in American basketball, you do have people who request trades, and so they're not part of the team. They're either not even at the games, they're in the box seats watching what's going on. And so you saw that with Beck. He wasn't really on the sideline. He was in the box office watching the games, and so he wasn't a part of a training session. And so at one point, the team isn't doing good, and they go to Fabio and they say, hey, let him train with us. He's part of the team. And so he ends up being able to play an actual game again. So Fabio has to take his way back basically, and Bex gets to play. And the reason for this is because the team isn't doing well, but then also I think at this point in the documentary it's January of whatever year, and his contract isn't over until June. So Fabio had probably planned on not playing him during that entire time, but they eventually needed him, and so he was able to play. And so they end up winning a huge match. They, I think, won a trophy. And at this point, Bex can either stay with Real Madrid or he can leave and go to LA. And so the thing that is on everyone's mind at this point is if you stay, you'll be with a really good team. But this is a guy who benched you. He could bench you again. Are you gonna be happy here long term? And then the other hand is the opportunity to go play in America, play in LA. And the risk of that is you're playing for an organization that's not really established. Soccer is not popular in America, and so this could be really devastating for him. And obviously, he's getting paid a lot of money to go play in America. I think he's getting $250 million. I wasn't sure for how long. So sometimes when you have a contract, you'll get, say, 5 million over 2 years, or you'll get 250 million over 10 years or something like that. So I don't know how long his contract was, but he was getting paid a lot of money. One of the things that I want to say about this is that at this point, Victoria has moved around a little bit to accommodate David's career, his football career, and so I really feel like he made this decision, even though it was like kind of like portrayed as a joint decision. It was something that Posh really wanted because she didn't like Spain, but she really liked America because obviously they speak English, there's Hollywood, and so it was just a better experience for her in America. And so I really feel like maybe that was kind of like the motivating factor for him going to America. And so you have him going to America. The team is not really good. They talk about how Bex is the highest paid player, but then you have some people who are only getting $13,000 for a year. You have some players who have other jobs, and so this is not anything close to a team that he is used to playing for, and so wasn't really a good decision for him at the beginning. So what ends up happening is that obviously Bex has a chance to play for the England team again, so the English national team, and Fabio is the coach for that team at this point, and so he tells Bex that he needs to play for a better team, and they have their mindset on AC Milan, and so somehow it's worked out that Beckton is basically loaned to AC Milan, and he has a good time, he wants to stay, and I think he's either there for 6 months, but he's there for quite a bit of time, and he's like, hey, I want to stay. The guy who brought him to LA initially was like, no, this is not going to happen. You need to come back to America. We're not letting you out of your contract, basically. And so he has to go back to America. And so the league that he's playing for in America is the MLS, and so this is basically an organization that's starting from the ground up. They're trying to get America big on soccer, and so they're not willing to let Bex go and play for another team. And so what happens is when Bex comes back to America, he had a teammate named Landon who's kind of like a really good player, and he's really frustrated with Bex for leaving the team, for not really what he feels like not really being committed to the team. And so he goes to the press, he makes awful statements about Bex, and Bex is obviously pissed off at it. And so you have the two of them butting heads, not really getting along. And so they have some meeting where basically they say, hey, this shouldn't have happened, you shouldn't have gone to the press, but Bex, you gotta understand, for this guy, this team is his Man United. So he really loves his team. He's committed to his team. And so from that point, they kind of understood where each other was coming from, and they were able to kind of come together and start winning. So Bex ended up playing for that team for 5 years, which is really cool. I'm actually really sad that I didn't watch any of those games. I think I knew that he had come to LA, but I'm not a football fan, and so I didn't pay attention to any of those games, and so now I kind of wish that I did, being that we would have been able to easily see those games. And so it was really cool that he was able to come to America, kind of make soccer kind of not necessarily relevant, but just draw attention to it because he's a big name. And so one of the things that I want to talk about is that with this LA Galaxy team, he had a huge deal in his contract, so he was getting paid $250 million. He had like this thing in his contract where he could get, I think, like a percentage of like maybe like the revenue for the games or something like that, but then also that he could buy an expansion team for $25 million. And so obviously $25 million is a lot, but other people who wanted to buy an expansion team would have had to pay hundreds of millions of dollars for a team, so he saved a lot of money. And then I'm just gonna leave it there because I'm gonna come back to that point for a second. But at this point, we have Beck. He's in LA. He's played for them for 5 years. He wants to retire, and so he does retire. And then he ends up getting a call from Paris. I'm not sure how soon after his retirement this is, and so he ends up going to play for Paris. They moved from America back to the UK, and Posh, at this point, they have her. She comes up a lot more frequently than I've indicated in this podcast, but they talk about this move again with her, and so she's like, again, we're moving again, because she had just gotten settled in America. They're having to move to Paris, and so what's really different about this experience in Paris for Bex is that he is feeling old for the first time. He is feeling sore getting out of bed. He's not kind of bouncing back as quickly as he used to when he's younger. And so he really realizes that this is it for him as far as competitively playing football. And that's always a sad moment in an athlete's career when they realize that they can no longer play because they've spent their whole life dedicated to playing the sport, to mastering it, and they obviously get a lot of joy from it. They get well paid for their jobs, and so they've spent their whole lives training for this sport. They want to play forever. Obviously, at some point, they have to stop, and so he realizes that he really does need to retire. And so with him retiring, he is able to take a break, and then he realizes that, okay, let's go ahead and start this expansion team in Miami. And so he has an expansion team, and I actually didn't realize that he had basically brought Messi to Miami. And so my sister's been talking about Messi playing in America, playing in Miami, and I didn't really know who Messi was. I know that he's a really big soccer player, just like Ronaldo. Ronaldo got a huge contract, by the way, I think like $1 billion or whatever. And so Messi is another player who's a really big deal. He's coming to America, and David Beckham is a part of all of that. And so I think that that's really cool that he had this as part of his contract, because it's him able to stay around football, being part of a team, even though he's not necessarily playing, but he's part of like building a team, and he gets to stay close to the game, which is what every athlete wants. Even if they can't play anymore, they want to still be a part of the organization, be a part of a team, and just get that adrenaline rush that they're used to from their playing days. So one last thing that I want to talk about, and this is not necessarily related to David Beckham himself, but I was watching the documentary, and there's a second where you see kind of like a zoomed out picture, and you see this guy and he's talking to someone else, and obviously this guy is like setting up an interview. So he's the director, and it was pretty far away, but I instantly recognized the person. It was somebody who was a character on Succession. His name was Hugo. He was kind of like the press person for that family, the Roy family. And anyway, I only knew this guy as an actor, so I was very surprised on why he was there. And so I did some research, and I found out that the actor's name is Fisher Stevens, and he is a director as well. And so his focus has been kind of like on environmental type of stuff, and so he's done other documentaries, other projects, so he is kind of like a established director, if you will. And so when he was approached to do this project, I found out that he was kind of like unsure if this was like the right type of work for him to do. But he is a football fan, and so he's a fan of the Liverpool team, who is direct rivals with Man United. And so I just thought that that was an interesting kind of connection, because I really wasn't expecting to see him in this role. I didn't know that he was a director, and so I think that that's just something interesting that you can kind of catch at a glimpse. Like I wasn't expecting to see him. He didn't have a major role in Succession, but obviously if you did watch it, you would recognize him. And so just being able to recognize his body from a distance and know who that was pretty cool. And then just doing the research on him was nice as well. And so I just wanted to throw that out there just because it is connected to the documentary, because he directed it, and so I just wanted to call that out. Yeah. So to wrap up this documentary, obviously I covered a lot of things that were talked about in the documentary. It was 4 episodes. It was really, really amazing to watch. I actually ended up watching clips of Spice World after I had finished the documentary. I watched it all in like one day, basically all 4 episodes in one day. It was really, really amazing. I kept talking about it for like 2 to 3 days after I finished it. And I'm actually really glad that I watched it, because even though I wasn't really a huge David Beckham fan, obviously he's contributed a lot to football. Him and his wife, they have been popular for so long. They've really changed what it means to be in the public eye, what it means to be a high profile couple. And so I'm really glad that this documentary is made. It was kind of like giving him his flowers, reminding people of how influential he was, how much he had an effect on pop culture. And so yeah, if you haven't checked out this documentary, I definitely recommend that you go ahead and do so. Even though I've talked about a lot of like the major things that happen, I think that you'll still get a great experience out of watching this documentary. And then if you've already watched it, I hope that you have a appreciation like I do for David Beckham, for Posh Spice, for their family, and everything that they've accomplished. And so yeah, I'm really glad that I watched this documentary. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up. It's been a long video, and I will see you guys in the next episode.